The African Union Peace and Security Council has reviewed the situation in South Sudan in a closed session. It's been briefed about both the economic and political situation in the country, especially the failure by rival parties to implement the peace agreement. The AU body has appealed for both sides to work together to lift South Sudan out of conflict. AU envoy to South Sudan Joram Biswaro has told CGTN the continental body will continue to support peace efforts overseen by IGAD. Let's get more insight and analysis on the security situation in South Sudan and the ongoing peace efforts. John Gashie is a veteran journalist and expert on South Sudan affairs, and he joins us live here in our Nairobi studios. John, thank you for your time tonight. What do you make of the ongoing discussions at the African Union Peace and Security Council on what is required to rejuvenate the South Sudan peace process?
Thank you, Penina. I think it's quite evident that the South Sudan situation, instead of getting any better, is deteriorating by the day. And perhaps it is a reawakening, so to speak, that South Sudan is, to a large extent, perhaps a failed state, if not already one. And perhaps the impact of that is, what will that mean in terms of security, both regional, internal, and in Africa in particular? But perhaps much more seriously is what the impact of that conflict would be internally. There are almost all indications that the issue of humanitarian crisis are in any way, any measurable manner, out of control. So South Sudan is, in my view, possibly the almost equivalent of Syria, so to speak, in the larger international community. And then the worry is how long and how soon should this be brought back under control.
Let me draw your attention to Festus Mogai, who leads the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission. He is calling for the expedited establishment of a hybrid court to try perpetrators of atrocities from the ongoing conflict. And over the weekend, he appealed to the UN for stronger sanctions against those standing in the way of South Sudan achieving peace. What is your reading of his sentiments?
That for me is a very, perhaps this ought to have happened a lot earlier, long earlier, because we are in the South Sudan situation. There are personalities, both within the government and outside the government, that are personally carry the bigger burden. And they have been made, so to speak, to get away with it. So to speak, for lack of a better term, they've been allowed to get away with murder, which, you know, it's rhetorical in this context, but it is actually happening on the ground on a massive scale. Who are this? They are within the government, they are within the opposition, they are known. The UN Security Council, the international community is aware of those individuals who share, you know, the greater responsibility. They have been, to a large extent, allowed, so for lack of a better, to get away with it on the basis that they would deliver peace. It appears now you needed to have more sanctions. You have to have a bigger stick, so to speak. The carrot, so to speak, in South Sudan is not working for the time being. So perhaps the UN Security Council, and indeed even the African Union, perhaps they feel we need to have a different approach and perhaps have more of a stick right now. We are hoping that the stick, as it were, is bigger enough, and those that are wielding it will be willing to really carry out that targeted personal sanctions and personal responsibility.
And then, of course, there's the killing of the American journalist. What do you think will be the impact of this, you know, impact on international attitudes and contribution towards resolving the crisis in South Sudan?
Yeah, it's a very sad. As a journalist, any time a journalist gets killed in line of duty is a very sad thing, and we want to really condemn that in the strongest terms possible. And that it's very unfortunate that somebody who was going out there to give the story of South Sudan has become a victim. But, and I need to really point this one out, South Sudan journalists themselves are and have been killed, murdered, threatened. Indeed, when you look at this, the international bodies or organizations that deal with journalists, the rating of South Sudan is among the worst 5 in the world. And in that group is North Korea, is Eritrea, is Somalia, is South Sudan. Now, would perhaps, and it might sound very sad that it takes then the unfortunate killing of a Western journalist that then the world comes to this. I am not in any way trying to diminish the tragic issues, but I also want to have that in its proper context. South Sudanese journalists have been and continue to be amongst the world's most intimidated, threatened, and killed. And the records are there. I am hoping that it won't take the world just because, unfortunately, an American journalist got killed. That's the when we start then saying it's getting out of control. It started a long time ago. And indeed, the more action, if then this unfortunate incident would then help perhaps to even draw more attention. It's sad, Penina, and I am hoping that perhaps we will get to the bottom of this and say it's all journalists, be they Western, African. Hey, you know, I'm a journalist, and you don't kill a journalist. I don't accept that, but we must see it in that context.
Changashi, thank you very much for those insights.